Welcome, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about reimagining learning and development. And the reason I want you to reimagine learning and development is because, for all sorts of reasons, I think it is out of kilter, out of time with what is going on in organizations. And it is focusing, I think, maybe you'd agree, I think it's focusing in the wrong places. So I think it requires a big shakeup. And I've got 4 themes or 5 themes I want to share with you. 5 ways in which learning and development has to be changed and the reasons why it needs to be changed. So this is the first one. I think that learning and development in most organizations is too safe. You simplify the world in order to make it easy for people to understand. The truth is that we live in a world that is getting ever more complicated, where to simplify actually becomes distortion. So if you want to transform using learning, if you want learning to be a party to your organizational transformation, you need to create brave spaces. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean by brave spaces. And I've got a couple of quotes on the screen. The first one at the bottom, I presented to a Dutch bank, and the Dutch CEO introduced me, and he said, "We learn, professionalize, and innovate together." And I thought that was a very profound statement, because most learning and development does not focus on us learning, professionalizing, and innovating together. It focuses on individuals, individual competencies, and individual drive and movement and career and success. I think the CEO is right on the button. We need to do it together to create an impact across the whole organization at a size and at a speed which will help us shift organizations to cope with an incredibly complex environment and climate out there. And the other quote is from a former Dutch minister. She talked about time for solid action. She runs a number of forums, global forums. It is time, I think she's right, it's time for solid action. And that is what I hope will emerge from my talk. Tinkering, playing around with technology is not going to create the transformation that I believe we need. And this is the second problem, as I see it. If you look at the screen, you see on the right the perfection of design. If you look at that path, it is perfectly built. It is incredibly well thought through. It is using expensive materials. It is perfect. The problem is it's in the wrong place. And so much learning and development focuses internally on quality design, high quality instructional design, using very good material, using extremely good graphics, and doing an absolutely exceptional job. The problem is it's not what people want or what people need. And how do you find out what people want and what people need? Look at the left side of the screen. People will form their own pathway, even if you think it's not where they should go. They will go there. And how do you know what pathway people want to walk on? You have to do field work. In my experience, there is a massive problem in L&D. There is not enough field work. In other words, people do not get out there and ask questions. When someone says, "Oh, we need some leadership development for our senior executives," you just go, "Okay, I'll do that." What you should say is, "How do you know that? What makes you think that? Where are the problems? Let me go and talk to the people." And you do your field work. And in doing your field work, you become a better and better practitioner. You see your role as a practitioner, and you see your role as someone who improves practice. And practice is holistic. It's not someone who manipulates technology, someone who uses technology. And I cannot believe that you can run an L&D operation without it being saturated in technology. But it's technology that listens to the messages from fieldwork and technology that helps everyone in L&D become better practitioners. And this is my third one. I think that we've missed a plot. We've missed a critical sense of development. And that is that we focus on individuals when we should be focusing on organizations. We focus on individuals learning when we should focus on organizational learning. And I believe that in a learning organization where learning is prevalent in the organization, the learning happens in the spaces between people. And what that means is that if you concentrate on making each one of those people highly competent, but you don't focus on the connections, then they are highly competent, but it doesn't transfer across the organization. The organization doesn't learn, the individual learns. So I imagine an organizational learning is like an organizational brain. You all have, give or take a few 100 million, 100 billion neurons in your brain. But what makes you smart is not the number of neurons. A few 100 million here or there makes no difference. What makes the difference is the connections between those neurons. And each neuron in your brain is capable of 1,000 connections. And the more those connections are used, the stronger they get. The neurons that fire together, wire together. And if you can make those neurons wire together very strongly by repetition and habit and by an assumption about the way the world works, you are a much more capable individual. Just as in an organization, the more connections there are between the people in your organization, the smarter your organization, the faster it will be to solve problems, and the more resilient it is. The problem is that in many organizations, there's an obsession with individual competence and no attention at all to organizational learning. And I think they're both incredibly important. If you take one message away from this, think about how you develop organizational learning in your place and not just focus on the individuals. And I want to echo the words of Etienne Wenger. Etienne Wenger invented communities of practice. And I think communities of practice, in other words, connections horizontally across organizations, not just vertically in silos. Communities of practice are incredibly important and becoming much more important. What Etienne said was that the problem with learning and development is it focuses on the transmission of certainty. It explains the world in that right at the beginning, as I said, in simple terms, you can know this, when the truth is we know less and less in our current environment. So Wenger is saying the most important thing a community of practice can do is mutually engage around uncertainty, explore uncertainty, work out what we do know, what we don't know in diverse communities and pull all that together. I think it's really important that we do that. So if you create a learning operation that is willing to step into brave spaces, not safe spaces, that focuses learning on dealing with uncertainty and has an accent and an emphasis on organizational learning, we're building together a learning and development operation that is fit for purpose. Our learning and development operations generally, I believe, are not fit for purpose in the world we live in now, and they have to be transformed, just as many organizations have to be transformed. So this is my model. This is from my book on workplace learning. And what I found when I did my research for the book was learning at the center, at the heart of my model, is irrelevant if you don't fix the things around the outside of my model. So, for example, if there is no trust in your organization, forget a learning culture, forget organizational learning, forget sharing and collaboration. No trust, no collaboration, no sharing, no learning culture. So the first thing you've got to fix is trust, and then link to that empowering people, building engagement, staff who believe in their organization and are deeply engaged with the work, and a leadership that exemplifies all three of those. So a leadership that exhibits trust, that empowers people and encourages and builds engagement. Once you've got that in place, you can then start the collaboration and sharing within an environment of purpose and autonomy. And that in turn will generate the learning culture wheel. And once it starts, it builds a momentum of its own. If you start off on the assumption that learning culture is more learning for individuals, you are completely missing the point. Learning culture is an environment where people focus on problems, mistakes, challenges, learn from them, and work together to build the right organization for the right time, for the right moment. It's very, very important. So this is WD40 Company. This is a company that has been transformed by the CEO, Gary Ridge, and this is his slide. And what Gary says in his role, he's been CEO for 12 years. In that time, he's taken the organization from a market capitalization of 200 million to a market capitalization of 1.6 or 1.7 billion. Absolutely extraordinary growth. And he's done that with the same product, WD-40. You're all familiar with it, in a yellow and blue can. And what Gary says is that learning and teaching are important, but only because they link to all these other things, to the organization's values, the sense of belonging of the staff, the ability to focus on tomorrow as well as today, the ability to develop specialist skills, and to build people who really feel they're taking on big challenges and celebrating together when they succeed. So it's a collective, coherent view of learning and development. Whereas most learning and development is pull in the curtains and just say, learning, specialist skills requires learning, and forget all the things that are important about building a coherent culture. It's really, really important. And my colleague, Matthew Bidwell at Wharton Business School put it rather well, I thought. Matthew's research showed that skills without motivation is useless. People will have the skills but don't use them. Skills without empowerment creates cynicism, and motivation without skills or empowerment causes all sorts of other problems. So it's only when you have empowerment, skills, and motivation together, skills, empowerment, and motivation together, and they're in alignment, that you have that transformational ability. Every organization needs to build a learning ecosystem. It's absolutely clear. But the problem is most organizations associate a learning ecosystem simply with technology. So they say, I need an LMS, I need an LXP, I need Teams or SharePoint or whatever. The problem is that a learning ecosystem that equals technology misses a whole bunch of opportunities and misses a whole range of important considerations to take into account. The first one is about people. You need something that is fit for your people. How do you find that out? You do your field work. You need a learning ecosystem that can manage both formal content, courses, but also social content, and enable social communication and social get-togethers, the communities of practice. If your learning ecosystem does not support communities of practice, there is something fundamentally flawed with your learning ecosystem. You need to start thinking again. You need a learning ecosystem that will deliver the right kind of data. In other words, you need a learning ecosystem that gives you enough data for you to be able to measure the impact that learning is making, not on individuals, but on the organization and on your organizational transformation. Once you've got those three in place, you construct the right technology, or you build together the right technologies. But that's not enough. The last point is almost the most important. How are you going to manage the governance of your ecosystem? And if the answer is L&D will manage it, they will govern it, they will make the decisions, wrong. Governance has to be outside L&D, inside the organization as a whole. You need to create ownership of what you're doing. You need the key people in the organization to recognize that what you've built is relevant for them, will help their staff, and will deliver the change that is required, or the transformation that is required. Very, very important. So governance is really big, and it's one of the key considerations if you're looking at a learning ecosystem, and not simply an afterthought or something you don't even think about at all. And the reason why that's important is that you have got to get the people in your company out of their comfort zone and in a learning zone. And sometimes they have to be slightly discomforted in order to do that. So they have to pass through danger before they get to learning. But you have to have people who have got through learning and not sitting there going, oh, this is easy. It's got to be difficult, and perhaps it's got to be slightly uncomfortable. So to sum up, I think there are three phases that you've got to deal with. The first is you've got to look at the world differently. What are you trying to do, and how does learning relate to your organization and with the existing technology infrastructure? It needs to be built into it, not set separately from it. And once you've reframed, you need to establish what is really important and rebuild. Set yourself targets that are focused not on as much learning as people can consume, to what is the most important area. What are the 2 or 3 things that this organization needs that we can deliver, and measure the impact you're making. And then finally, you need to set new agendas. So sometimes that means starting from scratch. Sometimes it means actually taking what you've got and building away from there into entirely different arenas. And finally, just this slide here. I like this slide. It's a picture I took in Tokyo. And what it's saying to me is that your world, your corporate world, will not be perfect. You won't have enough people, perhaps. You won't have enough resource. You won't be able to buy the ideal technology that you want. But you can still transform. You can still do a fantastic job. Just as the person in this picture bought their car and found it didn't fit in the garage. It's not a perfect solution, but better to have half the car in the garage than no car in the garage. Better to accept that you're working with the limitations you find yourself. The limitations in this picture are the guy hasn't got a garage that can contain even the world's smallest car. So he's or she is making do with what they've got, and they've come up with a solution. And I don't think there's any excuse for not coming up with a solution. So you need to think about what you do, how you do it, and to start to build around the 5 key areas that I have indicated. Those 5 key areas of transformation are absolutely critical for building a modern L&D that actually deals with the issues that organizations need to be dealt with, and isn't just inwardly looking, making its own criteria and satisfying itself. So that's my agenda. That's what I think is the most important way of reimagining learning and development. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Nigel, por la conferencia.